Okay, hello everyone. We're here with Erik Rydberg today. He is the Green Party candidate for Secretary of State in California. He's also the Green Party male spokesman for California. And today we're going to cover the topic of decolonization in America and what that means, what that movement is. Erik, so can you tell us about the indigenous people's decolonization movement?
Yeah, I mean, it's been going on from day one, right? Resisting colonization. When we think about colonization and colonialism, just to provide a context of like what it is we're talking about, and what it is that we're saying when we say colonialism. So the mechanisms of colonialism in America were capitalism, the need to extract resources and attain land and buy up water rights and rights to ores, like with the Black Hills, the gold rush, things like this, right? So capitalism would have been that first mechanism of colonialism, the actual need to extract resources and have control over the resources and able to produce products, sell products, gain profit. The other mechanism of colonialism, when we talk about it, is actually white supremacy, because of the way basically settlers came here, created their own set of laws, which they excluded not only indigenous people but anybody who wasn't a white male landowner. Actually, that was in the wording in a lot of the legislation. Um, and also patriarchy, because uh, a lot of tribal beliefs are and structures of our governments are matriarchal. For instance, the Iroquois Confederacy is where America based a lot of the structure of states off of the Iroquois Confederacy, as well as democracy itself. The Iroquois Confederacy used democracy. They called it the Great Law of Peace. All the women would vote. They'd choose a chief. If chief was getting out of line or if things were not going right, the women had the ability to vote them out. So the founding fathers of this government, the United States government, invited the Iroquois Confederacy to teach them about the Great Law of Peace, and they adopted um, basically America is structured after the Iroquois Confederacy and democracy. Of course, they changed a lot of crucial elements of democracy. For one, they made it so no women can vote, just complete polar opposite, and also there were requirements to actually be white and to be a landowner to be able to participate in democracy. And they also put together a system of a republic instead of a direct democracy, where you're not actually voting to make decisions, but you're voting for people who make decisions for you. And like John Adams said, democracy is anarchism, right? Because it allows the poor to rise up and throw out the rich because they'd be able to vote, right? So that's why the Republic was installed as a buffer zone for the rich to make sure that representatives could veto thousands and thousands of votes to keep the poor from actually doing anything about to disrupt the system of capitalism. So another unfortunate mechanism of colonialism was Christianity, um, which is divine right, the idea of divine right, that God actually set aside this land and all the resources and its people to be subjugated uh, by a civilized nation. Actually, the definition of civilization early in America was actually whether you were Christian or not. So those are the things that encompass colonialism when we talk about it. I mean, there's other things that have developed, but those are like the core um, sort of mechanisms of what it is that we call colonialism in American colonialism. So, so yeah, I mean, it's been resistance from day one. I mean, I'm sure you're aware of, the Thanksgiving, so-called Thanksgiving event. Um, you know, the Pokanoket, the Wampanoag, they saved the settlers, and within a few decades, they had basically uh, began slaughtering and killing the Wampanoag and Pokanoket. They actually made it illegal to be Pokanoket. It was illegal to be Pokanoket, and they deported Wampanoag to Bermuda, right? So America has a really horrifying legacy of what it means to illegalize a person, to make somebody illegal, and it has a really horrifying history of deportations, beginning, um, as early as that. That's in 16, 14, 15, 1600s were just unbelievable things that.
Yeah. Eric, can you tell us a little bit about your indigenous background, what tribe you're from, and where you're located?
Gotcha. So I am Pomo Indian from Sonoma County. My great grandmother was born at Chalanatachawi Village, which is right here in Jenner, California, what's now called Jenner, California. The village is by Goat Rock. My great grandma lived to be 102. She passed away when I was in my 20s. I used to spend every summer with her and my mom in Jenner, California. So the Russian River comes through in Sonoma County and it hits the mouth of the Pacific Ocean. Um, um, and so that's where my great grandma grew up. She was always around there, or Cazadero. She was involved with, there was an attempt by the Army Corps of Engineers to dredge up Crab Island and Penny Island in the Russian River right there at Jenner. And my great grandma was involved with efforts to stop that. She called in environmental organizations that actually ended up getting the Army Corps of Engineers to shut down the effort and actually saved our family island. There's a little island in the Russian River right at the mouth where the ocean is called Penny Island, and my great grandma grew up on there. So Pomo, right, is multiple bands that were gathered up when America took California, and they were relocated to Round Valley. So one of those bands was Kashaya, right? And that's my band, Kashaya Band of Pomo Indians.
Very interesting. Very interesting, Eric. Hey, so one of the things you touched on when you're describing colonization is protecting the water, protecting the resources. The colonization seems to have wanted to accumulate all the resources, and that was, I think, really one of the major tools on how they colonized America and subjugated people. You were at Standing Rock. You are a water protector. Can you tell us about that movement to protect the remaining resources that basically belong to indigenous people, and in a lot of ways, everybody, because even here in California, Nestle's taking our water for free. I think there's Flint, Michigan. There's a water fight all over. So this is a really relevant issue with the natural resource of water. It's a basic human need. Can you talk to us about that?
I can. And just to kind of touch on something that the American Indian movement has pointed out from a while back, particularly Russell Means. These water fights that are going on here in California, that are going on in Flint, Michigan, virtually the same exact thing that happened with colonization, right? So what Russell Means likes to say is, welcome to the reservation, right? Because they already took everything. They already took everything. They've almost taken everything from us. They almost took all of our lands and our resources and our water. So it's not enough anymore. So now they're doing it to their own citizens, right? So we're all in the same boat, because colonialism, capitalism, and that crony structure of what capitalism is creates a super wealthy elite, and it doesn't, at this point, as to how it's progressed, they're treating American citizens and sovereign citizens, everybody the same. If you got resources, they're going to come for them because they need to make a profit, right? So that's why Russell Means says, "Welcome to the reservation," because now you got to deal with it too. So Standing Rock, Standing Rock sued the Lakota Hunkpapa people. They tried to resist Energy Transfer Partners, a company that wanted to build a pipeline through multiple states, but also through the old 1851 treaty land of the Standing Rock Sioux. And they wanted to build this pipeline and put it under the Missouri River, which is the water resource for not only the Standing Rock Sioux Reservation, but for 18 million people downriver. So it wasn't just the Standing Rock Reservation and their tribal government, and particularly their youth, that's really started the resistance. There was farmers down in the states downriver, white farmers that were really are still furious, and there's lawsuits all over the place, and efforts to try and get them to stop pumping oil. Not just Standing Rock Sioux, but Standing Rock Sioux, they're the ones that their youth began to actually go out and resist the pipeline, stop the pipeline from actually being built. And when Energy Transfer Partners bought private security, they brought in dogs and mace and things like that, and began, attacking the youth with that. That's when the elders, tribal government, everybody jumped in and said, "No, we can't have this pipeline through our water because if anything were to happen, it would destroy our water resource." And if you've ever been out to Standing Rock Sioux Reservation, they really, really need the water. So to destroy it is to basically commit ecological genocide on the people. So I don't know if you're aware of what's going on with Navajo and their water resources because of the uranium mines, but there's this really wonderful indigenous lady who runs around. She's the water lady, and she's got to bring everybody water because their water is worthless. So that's the kind of scenario that the Standing Rock Sioux will be living in if anything happens in Missouri. So
is this in Nevada? Is that what you're talking about with the Navajo?
That's in New Mexico.
Oh, New Mexico. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Hey, thanks for that, Erik. Let me ask you this, because you're very informed. Is knowing your history important in the decolonization movement? Because I think one of the most powerful tools that an oppressor has is for people to not know their value.
Yes. It's very, very important to know your history. And part of the idea of colonization, particularly with America, is to break from the idea. They actually, it appears from what I've gathered and from what I've heard from many others, is it seems as if America, the idea of America being American, is to actually break with your culture, to adopt what this new American culture is. And when we think about American culture, what do we think about? We think about 2 cars in the garage, a microwave and a fridge, white picket fence, the American dream, right? Which, what is that? It's labor, production, but what drives all that? It's capitalism and it's resource gathering. It's so the white picket fence and this secure American dream has to come from somewhere. The products that you're making have to come from somewhere. They have to be taken. So anyways, but to answer your question, yeah, history is very important. It's good to know where you come from. It's good to know, your ancestors that got you here and what they had to go through for you to be here. And yeah, it's very important, especially if you look at the laws in America throughout history regarding indigenous people. It was illegal for us to speak our language. It was legal for us to pray. If you've ever heard of the ghost dance that started in California, you'll, research it. Look at, the ghost dance was an attempt, a desperate attempt to reach out to the American's God and pray to, the idea to say, like, please, whatever God out there, like, please stop this from happening to us. So because of the language barriers and just the fear that was instilled in Americans about us being red devils and all this crazy stuff, the Battle of Wounded Knee, and basically an elder man was ghost dance, and he reached down on the ground, picked up some dirt, threw it up into the air, and the cavalry just freaked out and mowed them all down. Right. So demonizing your culture is we're doing the same thing in my opinion, we're doing the same thing with Muslims right now. We're demonizing their culture so that there's fear. So when we go in to extract their resources, we have justified those moves by the religious-based fear or cultural-based fear. And that's exactly what they did to the indigenous people here. So yes, it's very important to know where you come from, but not only where you come from, but where other people come from and what their religions are and what their belief systems are, because how can you stand in solidarity with anybody you don't know anything about them? So yeah, reaching back, just like it says in the UN's Declaration of Indigenous Rights, reaching back and making sure that you revive and restore your culture and your language, and knowing what your ancestors had to go through and who they were and what they did. It's extremely important because it tells the story of how we got to where we're at today. And a lot of the things that are transpiring in this country become a lot less shocking, and you start to understand, this isn't the first time we've done this. It's not the first time we've gone in to extract resources. It's not the first time corporations were there from the beginning with America. That's not the first time we've gone into other countries to use their resources and their labor. So yeah, the decolonization movement, it's very important to know, because the way America teaches you about indigenous, or lack thereof teaching you about indigenous people, makes people very confused, and it's rather shocking to most Americans when you start actually hearing the real story, and then they can look back in their history and see, okay, when did my parents come here? I have Swedish and German family, right, on my dad's side, and I know my Swedish family came over in like 1904 on the Lusitania. So you start to see who your people actually were, and it is important, decolonization. Reach back.
And also, the contribution of indigenous people. I mean, keep in mind that there was so much produce that Europe didn't have. They didn't have corn, they didn't have tomatoes. There were so many things that were engineered here in the Americas prior to Columbus arriving here. I think many people don't know that history as well. So let's talk about the decolonization movement here in the U.S. Is it similar to what has happened in other countries like India and South Africa? What are the similarities and what are the differences?
Well, I mean, a lot of the similarities, just like, most of the colonization that took place was by a lot of the same people. Mostly it was the European Empire, right? But there's a lot of similarities because, as far as the UN describes indigenous, what that means is that you're indigenous to the land you're living on, but the government that you are living under is not ran by you or your people. It's ran by a occupational force, right? So, there's striking similarities all over. And, they take, South Africa, for example, they're actually taking their land back, right? In America, where we're at, is not only does this government refuse to even acknowledge, really, the Holocaust that took place, the millions, tens of millions of indigenous people that died you know, by genocide or by disease, they won't even really put it in their textbooks. So we have a really we have a tough battle here. And so, for example, I'll give you an example of what is taking place here in America. Not only in America, I'll just tell you like what I've been working with and what I've been witnessing here in California. I would say so. Since Standing Rock coming back to California, we see that California and the gold rush history is all over the place, as well as Spanish colonialism, right? But American colonialism is it's disturbing. So here in Humboldt County, I'm a member of the Humboldt County Green Party. We have in Arcata, what we have was a statue of President William McKinley in the Arcata Plaza, right? So William McKinley is on the top 10 most forgettable presidents of all time from Time magazine, right? So I wouldn't be surprised if nobody's ever heard of him. But for example, William McKinley was the one who signed the Curtis Act that abolished the governments of the Cherokee, Chickasaw, Choctaw, Creek, and Seminole tribes, abolished their governments, their courts, and all the laws that they had, and all their land rights, so that settlers could take their lands. And then he also passed the Benevolent Assimilation Proclamation, which allowed the U.S. to colonize the Taino Nation in Puerto Rico, the Chamorro in Guam, and also the Philippines, all the Philippines, right? And the Philippines was a horrifying, bloody massacre, including 11,000 people that like starved to death in McKinley's concentration camps. So it's a horrifying story, and we have a statue of this man right in the middle of Wiyot territory, right? So the Wiyot tribe encompasses their territory, encompasses Arcata, Eureka, a good amount of Humboldt County, and Arcata is kind of like right in the center of it. And not only do they have McKinley right in the plaza was the site during the gold rush where so when the Indian Relocation Act with Andrew Jackson, when they finally came to America, we talk about 500 years of oppression, but in California it's only 169 years, right? So in 1850, they made the state of California put aside $1.5 million to collect California Indian scalps and $50 for our children. And so there was slave auctions, and where also in Arcata, right in the plaza where the McKinley statue is, there was a slave auction. There's also one in Chico, there's one in Sacramento, one in San Francisco. So that's where this McKinley statue is right in the middle of what used to be the slave auction. And not only is there a statue of the guy, there's a plaque there that says, "In times of Indian troubles, we would retreat to the Jacoby storehouse." So those Indian troubles that they're talking about are the Wiyot, Yurok, Hoopa, all the surrounding tribes, attacking the square to get their children back. They're selling their children into slavery. So in the plaque is referred to as Indian troubles, right? So yeah, you're gonna have Indian troubles if you are selling our body parts in the middle of your town square, and you're selling our children. So anyways, the Wiyot Tribal Council made a vote to have the statue removed. Luckily, there's a Green Party member on the City Council of Arcata. His name's Paul Patino. He once 13 years ago, in his first term on City Council, I don't know if everybody knows this, but Arcata was like solid Green Party City Council, the first ones in existence. And Paul Patino was one of those members. He served his first term 2004 to 2008, and he got reelected in 2014. During his first term, he tried to put a proposal forward to remove the McKinley statue based on what the Yurok, Hoopa, Wiyot, everybody was just disgusted to have this person who did so much damage to indigenous people standing in the middle of the slave auction site of Arcata. It wasn't able to pass in his first term, but now that the Wiyot Tribal Council And there's official statements being made by the tribes to say, hey, please take this statue down. Paul Patino then brought another proposal. And this time he was able to pass it 4-1 after like 109 or something like that. Large amount of public comments, including indigenous people from Yurok, Hoopa, Wiyot, Karuk, Ohlone down in Bay Area, and Pomo, and a couple different bands of Pomo too. So yeah, passed 4-1 to remove this McKinley statue, and it's coming down. So there's an example of what decolonization looked like. There's a lot of things out there that are extremely harmful to indigenous people to just see them. I mean, it's cultural trauma. Think about the things that took place in, history belongs in a book. Glorification belongs on a statue or a pedestal. So they're glorifying a president that was massively terrible, really, really terrible to indigenous people. So there's an example that McKinley statue is coming down, but still there's resistance. There's lots of resistance. They're trying to put a petition up to stop it. And these are like the old logging communities and people that have this belief that this is somehow heritage, when McKinley was never in Arcata, never even been in Humboldt County. The story of the statue itself has a whole colonial backstory. So this is I'm giving you an example of this isn't just like some blanket fix. Everything has a story. Everything has something we need to learn, because they don't teach us about it in the history books, right? So just to finish this up, that statue was put there by a man named George Zender, who was a gold miner. He was a 49er. And a lot of that gold came out of Butte County, Placer. These are areas that I've lived in my lifetime. Grew up in Butte County. And the Yahi, the $1.5 million that California paid to the Indian hunters, resulted in the Yahi being murdered into extinction. Ishi was the last member of the Yahi tribe, and he lived the last 4 years of his life in the museum at Berkeley until he got tuberculosis and died. And that was the Indian hunters, this famous band of people, were celebrated in the streets of Sacramento and Oroville. Oroville, California, used to be the capital of California during the gold rush, right? Because the largest gold nugget ever found was found in Paradise, California, over in Butte County by Chico and all those things.
Okay.
So that gold money that came out of there, George Zender spent $15,000 to have the statue of McKinley made. So $15,000 back then is like $400,000 now, in nowadays terms of money, right? So he took his gold rush money, bought a giant statue of a imperialist colonial Indian killer, and then he brought that statue up to Arcata, and they even named a town north of Arcata McKinleyville, right? So everything about this, this is the kind of stuff, and this is why it's so important to know your history and know your culture and know how things transpired, because a lot of people, Arcata is like 80% Caucasian, and they walk by that statue every day. They don't know. They have no idea. It's meaningless to them. Just like, oh, it's just some big iron guy, right? Oh, he was a president. Oh, okay, cool. But they don't actually know the story. And for indigenous people, it's really hard to, not only in California was it only 169 years ago, but I mean, once you've heard these stories and you know the history of your family, it's horrifying and shocking and hard to get out of your mind.
Yeah, so it sounds like the decolonization movement is, well, it's important to this movement to educate people, because like you said, we're not getting that education in school. What are other strategies for the current decolonization movement in the U.S.? I know it's an ongoing struggle from the beginning of time, but talking about the current movement, what are things we can do to help it?
So there's some really good articles out there about what it means to be an ally, right? And I know the Indigenous Action Network actually asks that, you know, go beyond being an ally and actually be an accomplice, right? Because there's kind of you know, some of the things that we learned at Standing Rock is there can be kind of a like an ally industrial complex, you know. Martin Luther King, or I'm sorry, Malcolm X, uh, described the problems, like the difference between liberalism and conservatism being, you know, that really the only difference in political terms is that, you know, liberals kind of pose as your benefactor and your friend, but it's still to attain power. So in decolonization, what we're talking about is actually empowering people that haven't had a voice for 500 years, right? So the allyship needs to understand that, uh, you know, as an ally, you know, you don't need to like stand out in front of us unless we ask you to be, you know, to do so. You know, an ally stands at your side or they back you up, right? So it's a matter of, you know, showing up, right? If you know, if like I was saying earlier, if you don't know who it is or you don't know anything about them, it's like how can you stand in solidarity with them? So, and the job of education should not be a burden on the indigenous people who have been going through it. We know what it's all about. We've been going through it for hundreds of years. It's really up to allies to train other allies. It really should be. It shouldn't be our job to have to like rehash over and over and over and over and over again this history. Um, so it's like each one teach one. I tell you, you please tell other friends. You know what I mean? So that the work doesn't all fall to indigenous people who have to do it. So that's what you can do is start getting to know like who, you know, who's in your area, what land are you on, because that's the situation, you know. Like here I can say, you know, I'm on Wiyot land right now, you know. This is Wiyot territory, and it's my job as a visitor and a guest to meet with them and see what it is that they expect from me while I'm on their land and stand in solidarity with them. So it's a job. It's a job of getting to know people and to know how to stand in solidarity to where you're not like overshadowing them, you're not speaking for them, but you're actually helping to elevate their voices, right? Um, so there's no blanket, you know, there's no blanket. Here's what you can do. Go to this website. Um, it's there's people that have been living where you're at, wherever you're at in America, for tens of thousands of years, and you should go figure out what their struggles are and just stand with them, solidarity. See what you can do to help.
Hey, so let me ask you this. How do reparations figure into the decolonization movement, and what do reparations look like?
Right. So, so for the Kashaya Band of Pomo Indians, we got moved off of the coastline, and um, and a American man married a Kashaya woman and opened up this area of Stewart's Point as a sanctuary for Kashaya Band of Pomo Indians. Right. It's been 200 something years since the Kashaya Band of Pomo Indians has had any land on their ancestral coastline, all the way down from Bodega Bay, pretty much, Jenner, California, up to Mendocino, was all Kashaya territory. So a man recently, a few years ago, he gave 500 around 500 acres to the Kashaya Band of Pomo Indians of the coastline. So for the first time in 200 years, the Kashaya Band of Pomo Indians can actually do ceremony and be on, you our ancestral homeland. This isn't, that's a private citizen who did this, right? So what we need is this occupational state to recognize what it is they've done and begin to make similar actions, right? Because most reservations are very, very, very far away or very, very, very small in comparison to the territory that these tribes had. So reparations can come in the form of being able to get some of our territory back, right? It could come in the form of changing the names of, for instance, Senator Kevin Killer for South Dakota. He's Oglala. He was part of a movement that renamed the town of Custer. So they changed the name of the town to an indigenous name that the indigenous people originally called it. And there's a good example. First you could start by acknowledging that, the American River down here in Sacramento is not called the American River for 10,000 something years. It certainly was not called the American River. The Nicenan people, right, called it like Mokum River, and it was, which means Condor River, and it's been that for 8,000 years before Jesus Christ lived, right? So there's so many ways. First, we have to. I mean, it's a massive can of worms, and so we have to get everybody to understand what it is we're talking about, so we can really dive in, because there's 700 tribal nations, over 700 tribal nations, and a bunch that still aren't recognized. So we got a lot of digging to do, a lot of history to look back, a lot of people to give reparations to, and these are some of the ways that we can begin to do that. And I would also like to mention that reparations do not belong to indigenous people alone, but in my personal opinion, slavery is not migration. Being extracted from a continent to be forced labor, that's not migration. You're not an immigrant. You're a displaced nation. So reparations for African Americans are something that need to take place, because not only were they promised them for their participation in the Civil War, and they were rejected, but it's just the right thing to do. And we need to step away from the colonial mindset of, progress, infinite progress, infinite resources, infinite profit, and start thinking about what's the right thing to do to heal this nation and quit to stop dividing us up. And the only way you can do that is to step back and acknowledge what's transpired. Who are the indigenous people of this continent, and what has transpired here, and how to appropriately respond in a way that can actually heal us and bring us together. As long as we have this mindset of colonialism and capitalism and white supremacy and patriarchy, it's going to be really, really difficult for us to move forward. So reparations is going to take many, many forms.
Excellent. Thanks, Eric. I think we can start to wrap this up with this kind of last topic is, does decolonization in America include giving indigenous people a seat in our government?
So this is something I've been talking about a lot lately with a lot of different people. So the way tribal governments work are they're the equivalent of a state, right? They're supposed to be in a sovereign nation, a nation within a nation, and they are kind of. And but what So like the state government can't tell the tribal government really what to do, right? Or they can't like bring lawsuits against them and things like that, right? So um, so states get senators and states get congressmen, right? Each state gets senators and congressmen in the government.
Right.
But there's 570 indigenous nation states, uh, and we have Kevin Killer and in the Senate, and maybe a handful of you know uh, in national any kind of national representation. It's mostly state representation. We got Henry John Bear and the Holton Band of Maliseet Indians in Maine in the state representation, right? So yeah, if states get senators and congressmen, then why don't we have senators and congressmen from all the indigenous nations, right? See, these are the conversations. These are the conversations that need to take place, right? Um, so yes, the answer is there is going to need to be representation in all forms of government uh, on this continent for indigenous nations, and it's not limited to America, United States of America.
So this kind of brings me to a topic is Evie Reyes in Arizona is an indigenous lady running for U.S. Senate,
Mm-hmm.
and she represents indigenous people at the United Nations. So
Right.
even in the United Nations, American indigenous people have a seat at the table, which they don't have as much here in America. Uh, Evie, yourself, and the indigenous people you already talked about that have office or are running for office, like obviously that's important in what we want to do. So you're running for Secretary of State, and I just think that's really important. Do you want to talk about that before we wrap this up?
Yeah. First, big shout out to Evie Reyes Aguirre. She's taking on a Democrat who has voted with the Republicans like 80 something percent of the time. But more importantly, she's taking on Joe Arpaio, the sheriff who was involved with the tent cities, and Trump recently pardoned. Now that he's been pardoned for his involvement with multiple questionable things as the sheriff in the county, he's now running for Senate, and the Democrat is not much of opposition in the sense that on paper, pretty much a Republican. So Evie Reyes Aguirre is gaining great traction because she's been fighting against everything Arpaio has been doing for 20 years already. Everybody knows her. She works with here in Northern California. We have Seventh Generation Fund, and she works with a sister organization over in Arizona. So big shout out to Evie Reyes Aguirre. Everybody, possibly please go to EV4AZ, or I'm sorry, it's Eve, EVE number 4AZ. Please go and donate to her campaign and help Eve take on Joe Arpaio and the conservative Democrat. So for me, I was involved with the Bernie Sanders movement and saw how manipulating votes takes place, right? I saw what, election fraud looks like. In California, it was, we're semi-open primary, and there's provisional ballots, and it's confusing, and without the right leadership, your county registers can be told to do something that would create an effect where people don't get to cast their votes, or just outright tossing out votes or whiting out votes. There's just a massive amount of things that took place during the 2016 primary that is a really big sign that we need new leadership for the chief elections officer, which is the Secretary of State, person in charge of counting all the votes. And that's why I am running for Secretary of State. I ran for delegate for Bernie Sanders, saw what happened in the primary. We've got some massive problems. And with the current trajectory we're on with Alex Padilla, we're actually now there's five counties that have they're cutting maybe hundreds of polling stations to build these new things called a voting center, right? And everybody's going to get sent a mail-in ballot, right? So the mail-in ballots, if you're no party preference, this is exactly what happened in 2016. You get a no. Alex Padilla says, "Oh, you're no party preference. You get a provisional ballot that doesn't even have a presidential candidate on it, for example. And then you don't get to vote for, who you might want to vote for because that's the system, and you don't have an option. So now we're going to cut all the polling stations and just have one or two, which nowhere has that ever been shown to help anything out. Just look at Arizona from 2016, 5-hour long waiting lines because they cut 200 polling stations down to like 40 or 60. That caused a massive debacle. So yeah, this is a really great idea. Let's cut all the polling stations and create a voting center, and then send everybody vote by mail ballots so they get like a bunch of provisional ballots, or maybe somehow it gets lost in the mail. Like 20% of all mail-in ballots get lost in the mail. So we are on a track to huge election fraud in 2020, massive discrepancies. You're going to have a really hard time voting, California. So I'm here. I'm trying to say, vote for me, Erik4SOS.org. I will mandate no more voting machines, hand-counted paper ballots, tried and true recounts. We will count them twice to make sure we got them right. There's lots of things we can do, but we need to stop voting for corporate-funded candidates. Alex Padilla raised $6 million in 2014 from corporations so he can do what he did to us on June 5th or June 6th in 2016. So please go to my website, Erik4SOS.org. Look me up on CrowdPack, Erik Rydberg, ERIKRYDBERG. Get a hold of me on Facebook or Twitter. I'll send you my pamphlet information. We have these great pamphlets that are put together by the Clearinghouse Committee with large participation by members of the Green Party of Santa Clara County. Thank you, Michael, everybody.
And Nassim.
Yeah, Nassim. Yep. Nassim, Christine, everybody. Melanie. Okay. And then so here's me. I got my information. My platform is the Green New Deal, right? But not just any part of the Green New Deal, but the fourth part. There's 4 parts. There's Economic Bill of Rights. Homes is a right. Jobs is a right. Healthcare is a right. All those great things. It's basically FDR wanted to get it in, but he couldn't.
That's a big dent in it for decolonization right there.
It is. Yep. So, and then green transition. We got to move off of fossil fuels. We're going to do solar panels, wind farms, organic farming, permaculture, all kinds of great stuff, right? Another big takeout. Stop running pipelines. Stop running pipelines through our water. And a real economic reform or financial reform. So that's break up the big banks, public banking, stop allowing investment banks to fund pipelines like Dakota Access Pipeline. Like 4 out of the Democratic Party's top 10 donors are Wells Fargo and the U.S. Bank and the banks that all funded Dakota Access Pipeline. And then the last one, that's my platform, right? It's a functioning democracy, right? So, and the number one on the top of the list is that we have to revoke corporate personhood, right? So here in Humboldt County, we passed nature rights. We gave rights to nature, to our waters, to our trees, right? And because of corporate personhood, Michael, you might know this, the oldest living human being in America is the Santa Clara Railroad, right? Because of corporate personhood.
Right.
Corporations have human rights. So that means, like in the case of the DNC, they have the First Amendment right to choose their candidate. They don't have to count your votes. They don't have to follow their charters or processes. Legally, your vote is not an argument in court. They're a private corporation. Their First Amendment right is to choose their candidates. So for nature rights in Humboldt County, it's the corporation's right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. So I say you can't, we vote, we have a democratic vote and say you can't run a pipeline through our water, or you can't do fracking, or you can't do GMOs, or whatever it may be. And the corporation comes in and says, We have the right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. We're suing you. You either have to overturn the legislation you just passed, or you owe us all of the lost profits that we would have gotten from being able to do what it is that you voted against, right? So go to movetoamend.org. They've documented over 200 cases of corporate personhood being able to overturn legislation democratically voted on by the people, right? So please look up the Green New Deal. Look up a functioning democracy. You can see there's a lot of changes that need to be made, right? And these are things that I could do as Secretary of State. So please go to gp.org. That's the Green Party's of the United States website. Look up the Green New Deal and read it. Read it twice, read it 3 times, read it 4 times. Make sure that you've read it all thoroughly and that you know it well. And if you can find anything in there you don't like, call me. Let's talk about it. It's amazing.
Erik, every time I talk to you, I'm always impressed by your knowledge and your courage to fight for what you stand for. And I wish you luck. One more time, how about your website so people can donate and volunteer? I know the Green Party always needs volunteers because we do not take we do not take corporate money.
No corporate money. We're the only national corporate free party in existence. We got ballot access and we have a national committee. Not easy things to attain. It took us 20 years on volunteer time to do it. So please check out Erik4SOS.org. It's right here. Erik4SOS.org. So I can help defend democracy and protect the vote. Please go to Erik4SOS.org. Erik4SOS.org.
Awesome.
Thank you so much, Michael, for this time.
Yeah, thank you, Erik. You take care.
Brother.